Okay, welcome everyone to another edition of Goethe's Faust. We are now officially in part two, which is the traditionally has been the part that's been neglected. Most people are not very familiar with part two, but we're going to dive right into Act One and see what you guys think about it. I personally have really enjoyed reading it, and as we were talking just before the start of the recording, it's really interesting because when you read the commentary on it, it's wide open field for speculation. There's really not a canonical interpretation of what is going on a lot of times. So all of us are free to come up with our own interpretation and our own sort of synthesis of what's happening. But I want to give just a quick overview of the content, and then just maybe make a couple of notes, and then we'll go to you to see what you guys thought, and what were the high points for you, what you thought was interesting, etc. So let me back up for just a second. So I was thinking, what would be a good epigram to hang on top of our kind of in front of our, as a backdrop to our conversation. And I was thinking that since Goethe himself makes numerous references to the Bible, obviously the book of Job is the backdrop story for the entire thing. And then we have references to the Song of Solomon in a more satiric or perhaps ironic reference there. Another good reference point would be a book that's sandwiched in between those two, which is the book of Ecclesiastes. And of course, the book of Ecclesiastes comes up because it's a book of extreme skepticism about the presence of meaning in the world. The book opens up with this pronouncement, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. But in chapter 2, we have sort of the program of this person who is in some ways very similar to Faust, in that he is given a chance to experience life in all of its manifestations. And in chapter 2, he says, in verse 10, "And whatsoever my eyes desired, I kept not from them, and I withdrew not my heart from any joy, for my heart rejoiced in all my labor, and this was my portion in all my labor." And then the next verse says, "Then I looked at all the works of my hands that they have wrought, on the labor that I had labored to do, and behold, it was vanity and vexation of spirit, and there was no profit under the sun." So it's this vacillation between search and failure. And obviously Solomon, who is supposedly the author of this, tries to experience different aspects of life, and wherever he turns, whether it's to reveling or building or riches, it all kind of crumbles down, and he is very skeptical about life. And of course, with Faust, we have the same kind of program, except that it's a bet between him and the devil, and in a larger sense between God and the devil, whether or not he will be able to find something that satisfies him to the point where he doesn't need to strive anymore. And in part 1, we've gone through various permutations of that, with going to Aerbach's wine cellar and having some partying, and then of course we had romance and sexual pleasures, and then we even went further into more kind of devilish experiences with Walpurgis Night. That's kind of where we left off last time. Of course, afterwards there was that interlude, and we went back to the consequences of all of this, which was Gretchen's demise, although she was saved in the last, kind of snatched by the skin of her teeth at the end. But the end result of that was sort of tragic. And of course, part 2 opens up with a connecting link between all that happened prior to that, which is Faust is sleeping, but he is not well. He now has additional aspect of a Faustian experience, which is remorse and guilt. So part of the striving, part of this idea of striving without limits. And now we have this additional baggage we have to carry, which is remorse and guilt. And the first thing that Mephistopheles tries to do through this medium of Ariel and his airy spirits is try to dispel this somehow, which is an interesting concept in itself. Ariel represents, again, this sort of middle ground between demonic and natural, this ground that is occupied by elves, goblins, fairies. It's not really clear where do they fit in the scheme of things. Are they good? Are they neutral? Are they just kind of part of nature? Of course, in the Romantic tradition, they are essentially part of the irrational, unscientific region that is, I guess, symbolized by nature in some ways, and they symbolize nature. And so it's interesting to see how Goethe brings all of these ideas in as where he uses them as a kind of this healing medium to try to assuage Faust's remorse and guilt and all the rest of it. I want to read just a short passage there, which I wonder if you have any thoughts about, but it's the passage that describes the sunrise. And Doug, you were talking about how you need something pungent to keep you kind of going. And I thought maybe, I don't know if I thought this line was interesting. And the reason it was interesting because it brought up a very specific musical piece, which I actually want to play for you. But I want to read the passage first. This starts in around 46-65. And this is the idea there is there's a chorus, and then Ariel is hailing the rising of the sun. So the spirits have done their thing, and they've sort of wafted away Faust's heaviness and concerns, and now the sun is rising, and Faust is going to come on the scene next. But just before that, Ariel says, a staging line is a stupendous clang that proclaims the approach of the sun, which in itself is interesting. I don't really associate the sunrise with lots of noise. To me, it's more silent, right? We don't really think of sunrise having any noise, really. But here it is. And the reason is it's associated with the Phoebus's chariot. And so the poem goes, hark the storm of hours rounding, clear to spirit ear rebounding, knell of day's renewal sounding, granite portals groan and clatter, wheels of Phoebus roll and spatter, what great din the dawning brings, trumpet blaring and fanfaring, ears bedazing, eyes beglaring, fear to hear unheard of things, and so on. So when I was reading this, a very specific musical piece came to mind, and I want to share with you. Probably, I'm sure you all know it, but I'm curious if any of you made that same connection as I did. But in any case, I thought it was worthwhile. So let me see if I can reproduce this real quick for you. Share my screen. Okay. So I'm sure you've recognized this, most likely. This is from Strauss's Das Spake Zarathustra. The specific part of this is called the Sunrise, actually. So I thought it was just too perfect with a German writer and a German musician, composer. And of course, they're talking about the sunrise. And anyway, that was the association that I had in my mind as I was reading this. So, okay, so Madeline, just for, did you want to comment real quick on this?
Yes. Once you put that up, I realized that the chorus at the very beginning of that, it is in the exact rhythm of Beethoven's Ode to Joy. When the scented breezes sighing through the green encircled glade, the whole thing is exactly like that for that preliminary chorus.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I didn't catch that. Okay. Interesting. Thank you. So going on with this, we have Faust is revived, and that's the next thing that he says is that he is now able to cast off the guilt, cast off the baggage of part one, and resume his search for truth. And on line 4685, he says, "Already set resolve, astir and seething toward peaks of being to be ever driven." So this expression towards the peaks of being, of course, is the theme of the entire book. This idea of Faustian man who is searching for unlimited everything, and sky is the limit, infinity and beyond, so to speak. So he is basically signaling that he is ready to resume his striving, his search for meaning with Mephistopheles, and to move forward. One of the interesting thing there, as he looks at the sun, he is blinded by it. And he has this little passage about how desires are blinding us, and we need to put them behind us, and that way we can actually see what's happening. When the light is behind us, we can see, but when we look at the light, we are blinded. And I thought that was an interesting little tidbit about sort of psychologically about how desires can blind us. Anyway, the book is full of these departures from the main plot, but are interesting nonetheless. And maybe this is not a departure. Maybe this is part of the overall scheme, because obviously desire is a major part of this. So then we switch gears completely. So we start out in this field, and now without any sort of connecting thought, we find ourselves at the court of an emperor. There's no particular description of where this is, who this is. Of course, the word for emperor, German word is Kaiser, which we're familiar with, which harkens back to Caesar and classical antiquity and everything that has to do with that. And of course, classical antiquity is going to be a big theme in this part. A lot of commentators that I've read seem to actually identify emperor as Faust, not in a literal sense that he is Faust, but in a more figurative, kind of prototypical sense, that he represents Faust in his, first of all, his level of immaturity and his search for some kind of order, stability, meaning, and his failures to accomplish those. So that's an interesting thought in itself, and maybe we can explore that avenue. I'm curious what you guys think about that. But then you have this additional layer of meaning, which is, of course, Goethe himself was served at the court of Karl August, who was the Duke of Weimar and Eisenach. So the experiences that he describes here with the emperor are very much a mirror of his own experience serving at the right hand. He was part of the private council for this Duke of Weimar. The Duke, by the way, was about 18 years old when Goethe was summoned to accompany him. So this is like these young guys who don't know what they're doing. And Goethe himself, he just, I guess, graduated from the university, and now he is at the court of this Duke, and he's advising him on all kinds of state matters. And so in Faust, obviously we have this dual plot line going on, where it's both reflective of Goethe himself, but also possibly of Faust. And then, of course, the Mephistopheles enters the scene as the jester. Faust is not really on the scene, which is why commentators think that Emperor represents Faust, because Mephistopheles comes in and he is now advising the emperor in what to do, just like he was advising Faust in what to do earlier. And the advice that he gives him is, well, first of all, the empire is in shambles, and we can read about a little bit about that. It's a moral decay, and it's there's injustice everywhere, and also they're broke. So Mephistopheles' great idea is, hey, let's look for treasures in the ground. There's a lot of treasure buried here in Germany. So let's see if we can unearth that, and that will help, right? Emperor, he goes with that. He says, sure, you just tell me where to dig. we'll start that. And by the way, the empire is collapsing. There's injustice, there's theft, murders in the street, rape, etc. What is the emperor planning? The emperor is planning a carnival. He's planning a ball. I mean, this is not reminiscent of the French Revolution and things prior to that, immediately prior to that. I don't know what is. Let them eat cake. That's this kind of theme. And bread and circus, right? Harkening back to Caesar and the gladiator games. So basically, a diversion for the public away from everything that's menacing them and the government. Let's have a ball. Let's have a carnival. And the next scene is the carnival. And the carnival is very, very interesting. We have lots of different characters there. There are flower girls, and then there are different, even flowers themselves singing and offering insights into who they are and what they do, etc. Then you have gardeners, and you have woodcutters, and then you have parasites, which are people that are obviously living off the state, not doing anything. But it's interesting they're called parasites. So anyway, I'm not going to comment too much on this, because I'm more curious about how you've interpreted this, and if you had any sort of a way to synthesize all of this, except to say that we have kind of a cross-section of perhaps or society, a cross-section of society, right? And I guess, Ella, what I was curious, because you are our resident alchemy expert and specialist, what I was curious about, if this in itself is a connection to the alchemical process, in a sense that society is the macrocosm. And the great maxim of astrology and alchemy in general is, as is above, so is below, right? The connection between the stars and the world at large and our own private world is what drives the world, right? Drives reality. And that's why we have horoscopes and astrology, etc. So it's very interesting if this is actually the portrayal of society is a portrayal, in a sense, of a single person, Faust himself, and the conflicts and the different aspects of him, his learning, which is classical in part, and then German in the other part, and then you have all the different aspects of that, and you have the parasitic tendencies, and you have the utilitarian tendencies. So there's a lot going on here. So what is the end of this part? We have the procession of victory, which is symbolized by an elephant with reason sitting on top of it, and then you have hope and fear enchained. They're kind of at the bottom of the or to the sides of the elephant, and and then you had Furies and you had Fates, which again bring up all the classical tradition of life and everything associated with them. And then finally you finish up with a more Germanic folklore characters such as fauns. Well, I guess they're not Germanic, but the gnomes are, which are kind of like hobgoblins, I guess. And you have fauns and satyrs, and then that's this carnival, right? So that is a big part of the play, or the big part of the part one. And then you have the intermediate part, which is Faust. We're back with Faust and Mephistopheles, and Faust wants to summon Helen in Paris. Of course, this goes back to his vision in part one, where he saw a beautiful woman in a mirror in a witch's kitchen, and he now seizes his opportunity to see her and to summon her. And we have a very interesting discussion with Mephistopheles about what it would take to bring her back. Eventually, he does bring her back, and the part one finishes with him fainting just when he tries to sort of lay hold of her. In between that, we're going back to the economic part of the empire and the plan to issue paper currency that's based on future treasures, which are going to be discovered in underground. So this part is, again, we oscillate between the magical and kind of I would say hyper real, right? The economy part, it's almost too good to be. I mean, it's almost too perfect, because we're right in the middle of, in the United States with the Federal Reserve policies and interest rates and all that. So we see exactly this type of theme interjecting itself into something that we wouldn't expect from a kind of a part of romantic movement or romantic poetry or romantic piece. But Goethe, in his genius, he puts it all in, and somehow perhaps it works, or maybe it doesn't work. So I'm curious what you guys think about that, whether or not it actually is meaningful. So those are the highlights to me of this section. And now I guess we need to talk about what it all means and how it all kind of works together. So I'll open it up. Doug, I'll give you a chance to speak next, and then after that, guys, if you can, just a reminder, if you can type an exclamation point if you want to contribute. That way it's easier for me to tell the order of the speakers. Yeah, we'll go from there. Doug, you're up. You're muted, Doug.
That's a good introduction. Thank you. Yeah, the overview of this first section I actually could grab onto once I studied two different translations and I sort of saw the point of it. But the whole arc of Act One, I couldn't really grab until I read this version that's designed to play the whole play in one night. And it's a very famous Scottish theater, I think, I don't know. See if I can read this. Robert David MacDonald is the director of Glasgow's celebrated Citizens Company, and it's translated, I think, by the director. And so it's very theatrical, and you get the thrust of the action of the piece, like in Aristotle's sense that tragedy is the imitation of an action. When you see it translated by a director, you can grab the action of it. And then when I go back and read what's cut, I can sort of say, okay, that makes sense. And it's sort of mind-blowing what I think Goethe is doing, and I have to spend more time to figure it out, but it's almost like he's doing something that Dante did, but it's a poet with a mentor poet going on a journey, and they're commenting on what they see. In this case, it's almost like he's dramatizing Plato's dialogues. Instead of being dialogues between two people, he's having a whole theater company act out philosophical issues. And one of the key ones is power and beauty, which is actually two principles in Sufi thinking of majesty and beauty. The power and the beauty, and the emperor is one and the poet is the other, but the poet is actually a slave of the emperor, often glorifying the beauty of the emperor, even if he's an idiot. It's like, what an amazing man he is. And so there's sort of really astonishing things he's doing here. So that's one thing. The power and the beauty is one. The other is that amazing scene where they go from like what you mentioned, the economic despair to manufacturing paper money, which suddenly is like freedom, and there's money falling from the sky practically. And and they make comments, well, I don't have to tell you what to do, just pick it up, just grab it and you're wealthy. And so that's strange. I mean, he's got, if you read Plutarch's Lives, he actually talks about Lycurgus starting Sparta with money as big as huge stones. So nobody's going to hoard money, because it's like you have to carry a stone in a wagon as large as a little cottage almost to buy a cow. So nobody hoards money when it's too heavy to carry. But when it's paper, it's even lighter than gold. And so it suddenly creates this illusion of wealth that doesn't really exist. But in a way, it gets to the heart of what money is. It's symbolic. And so and then I actually saw a reading last night of a play that I had a very hard time absorbing, about John Dee, who may be the inspiration for Marlowe's Faust and also for Prospero and The Tempest. And it's funny how these guys are covering the same territory, John Dee and Goethe and Faust, and that whole occult philosophy and alchemy and the kind of transformation and the visitations. John Dee had visitations from angels, which then another guy joined up with him. It was something of a con man, the guy who joined up with them, and it creates all kinds of strange things. But also an odd thing, I think I mentioned, I grew up Mormon, but kind of Berkeley Mormon, which is like almost the Jesuits of the Mormon Church. But it's like Joseph Smith's family was pretty poor, and they were very obsessed with digging up treasure. And in the end, so symbolically, digs up these golden plates, which are a future religion. So, I mean, that digging of this stuff out of the earth that is material wealth or spiritual wealth is sort of something I grew up with. Under the pressure of the war in Vietnam, I left the church, but it's been interesting to explore the magical roots of the Mormon religion. And I think it comes from Goethe and further back to John Dee and other people. It's like early Mormonism and the world magic book view. There's a book about that. So all of this is a similar thing. And and so in a way, Goethe is footnoting in a way, or commentary on an astonishing legacy of literature, both dramatic, poetic, and occult, I think. And so it's, I don't know, I'm just beginning to scratch the surface of that. But that I guess that's it, just that he's actually, instead of doing a platonic dialogue between two people, he's acting out these things with a whole company of actors and clowns and idiots and brilliant people and beautiful women and witches and people who are beautiful, people who are ugly. And then the whole Paris, that's really interesting. And I read it as that the emperor now is so wealthy, he's getting bored, so he wants to do something really great, like see Paris and Helen. And so then Mephistopheles gets Goethe to go on the journey to pull them up. And that's so, I mean, if it's staged right, that could be so funny that he's bringing this as a gift to the emperor. And then essentially Faust wants to steal Helena, and then he's sort of blown apart by trying to do that and collapses.
Right.
The absence of Faust, this is a question. Why is Faust absent? And I don't see it so much that he is the emperor, but I think he's been so worn out by Act 1 that in Act 2, he needs a long rest, and Mephistopheles knows he needs a long rest. So he, like a kid who's done too much, just puts him to bed for a nap, and then he has to travel from the fields to get to the throne room. And so there's a long journey, but it doesn't even really, when he finally shows up, there's no big announcement. There's no full explanation of that. I didn't see it. Maybe somebody else did, of how he's just suddenly there and talking. But it's like, there seems to be so I can see why people would say, oh, he's the emperor. But I think it's different. I think it's like, okay, put him to sleep for a while so he can rest up for part 2. And
Yeah, I hear you. I don't know, like, because he does wake up, right?
Right.
Just before that, he does wake up. So, I mean, him going back to sleep kind of seems anticlimactic in a sense there. But that's interesting. Yeah, that's interesting. And by the way, the idea of Helen and Paris, that's also in Marlowe. So Marlowe has the same exact setup where there's an emperor and Faust is entertaining him by bringing back various famous people from the past, including Alexander the Great. And then he brings back Helen and he wants her to immortalize him with a kiss. That's how Marlowe puts it. But then, of course, we have a very passionate description of Helen by Faust in Goethe as well. So that's definitely a very interesting part of this this setup. Okay, thanks, Doug. Next up is Ella.
Hi, everyone. Yes, I was just thinking about this. We're really getting, into the alchemical. The ailing kingdom, everybody's suffering, everything's falling apart. They need a treasure to heal and so forth. And ironically, you have Mephistopheles, who's playing the sage here. And in the imperial palace, I think that's ironic that he's the sage now. Oh, I have a great idea. Let's just he says, I think that the gold has more than one meaning in that it has an alchemical interpretation. And as opposed to regular gold hidden in the earth, because it's supposed to transform everything, and metaphorically, obviously, but it's gonna make this kingdom well. It's going to heal everyone and everything, and so I think. What we have, by the way, I'm not an expert on alchemy at all. I just kind of stumbled upon it when I was years ago when I was researching Carl Jung. And certainly alchemy's been around since, Plato's, Socrates, etc. And I just found it was a really good interpretive method to use because it's incorporated in so many poems and so much literature, and you may not even be aware of it, but once you become aware of it, you start to see this being used as a tool by the writer to communicate different symbols, which is pretty much what Jung did. He just used it. He tried to interpret the unconscious and becoming whole, getting out of the ego, facing your wounds, your giving up your beliefs and other problems with your personality, and going beyond that, which is Faust's journey. And so he used this metaphor of alchemy, I believe. Jung tried to pull in symbols because how do you actually talk about the unconscious mind? It's pretty difficult to put into language. So he used this old set of metaphors, which did have there was a spiritual alchemy as well. But, there was also a literal alchemy that was based, of course, on turning base metals into gold. So basically, I see that in general, and I'll get back to this, as we go on, but let someone else speak here, that he's going into, you know, Faust is going to be going into a transformation very soon here, and alchemy is going to come into place in this transformation, and the parts of him are going to try to unite, and we come up with some bizarre things, the egg and that sulfur, and the bat flies off into the heavens, and there's all this representation into alchemy. But I'll just give someone else a chance if that sounds
Sure.
like a good
Sure.
idea.
No
Okay.
problem. Yeah,
All right.
I was just curious if, you know, obviously you've already mentioned this idea of transformation. I think we're all on the same page there. And
Yeah.
it's pretty obvious that the whole game here is to see if Faust starts out in a dark place, in a place where he lacks meaning, he lacks sense, he's tried all kinds of things. So he's not in a good place. And obviously the idea, just like with Gnosticism and alchemy, is to lead him to some sort of transformed state, which honestly is the subject matter of a lot of works of this type. Even, you know, Doug and I were talking about this before. Dante's Divine Comedy is exactly very similar journey. And by the way, includes this interplanetary travel, which of course is something that is almost exactly what the alchemists used as a metaphor, right? You go through the different metals as you go, and each metal is represented by a planet. And you go through different stages internally. You get purified as you, well, in the Gnostic tradition, you have to know some secret to get past the archon of each planet, right? The guardian of each planet. In Dante, it's not about knowing some secret password. It's about actual moral transformation, which he underwent in purgatory. But in this book, as we've mentioned this before, the modern man is not so much on a quest to purify himself morally. He's on a quest to find meaning and satisfaction. And that's the game here. But it's also, it requires some sort of transformation. So right now we're in the interesting mode. We've gone from kind of, I would say, base layer, you know, thinking of Maslow's pyramid of wants. We've gone through the base layer of, okay, let's eat, drink, and be merry. Okay, that doesn't work. Let's have some sexual / romantic experience. Okay, that's good, but it's still not good enough. Let's go and have some supernatural / mystical experiences on Walpurgis Night. Okay, that was good too, but still doesn't really do anything for long-term satisfaction and meaning. And now we've switched gears, and now we are in a completely different setup where all of a sudden it's not about your personal ambition anymore, or so we think, or at least it starts out this way. We're embedded now in a society, which is a big shift in dynamics. And I guess I was curious, Ella, if you thought if there was some sort of counterpart in the alchemical macrocosm / microcosm dichotomy, if that played into it at all, because obviously we've gone from here's me and my wants to here is this imaginary society, right, with an emperor heading it up, and we have to now solve not just one person's problems. We have to solve an entire kind of macro problem, right, of the small society, which perhaps represents or could represent or mirror a single person's problems. And this is, of course, goes back to Aristotelian thought of politics, right? If you read Aristotle's Politics, it starts out talking not about government per se, but it talks about a single person's happiness. And that drives kind of everything else, which is very unusual and interesting approach, right? That we don't really talk much about on the Capitol Hill so much. What do people actually like? What does make a person happy? What kind of life? What kind of experience? So anyway, I know I'm digressing here a little bit, but to bring it back to Faust, what do you guys think of this idea? And this, as I was reading this, I thought about John Bunyan. Most people know John Bunyan through Pilgrim's Progress, but John Bunyan actually wrote a number of works, and one of them, which I read partially, is something called The Holy War. And the Holy War is another allegory Christian allegory, but it presents a person, presents this city. A fortress city is like an allegory of a person. And you have like the ear gate and the eye gate, and you have the heart gate. I mean, it's, all these different gates of senses. And then you have the diabolus, the devil, who is assaulting the city and trying to capture it. And he does capture it. So anyway, with that allegory in mind, and I'm sure Goethe was aware of it at some point, what do you think of the idea that the emperor and all of these different aspects of governing this empire is really kind of the same thing? It's really talking about a personal quest for fulfillment and meaning, just on a different scale, just from a different lens. And then you have the carnival, which perhaps could represent, again, kind of going back to the simple pleasures of life and different aspects of that. So anyway, curious if anybody has any thoughts on this. Ellie, you could feel free to comment if you have a response to that or not, or anyone else. Just type in the exclamation point in the chat. And we can. Doug, go ahead. You're muted.
The macrocosm and the microcosm, I think that's true. That, and I would say even in a sense, the emperor is Faust in that Jungian sense that if you have a dream, every character in the dream is a representation of the dreamer. So I think they're working in that level. And even in, that's interesting. I don't know that book by Bunyan, but George Bernard Shaw loved John Bunyan, and for a range of, which you wouldn't think because he was such a socialist sort of atheist.
Right.
And sort of a mystic as well. I mean, so he liked John Bunyan. And when I read the beginning of it, it's also, Bunyan makes a big article that many Puritans would think he was frivolous because he spoke in fairy tales and parables and symbols, and he gives a justification of fantasy, which could apply to Goethe as well. And I think in the economics too, this whole microcosm, macrocosm, they're still dealing with it today, and they're digging to bigger depths of how unpredictable people are. When they said, oh, people always behave in their own self-interest. Well, they found that's not really true economically, that, they can track groups of people's behavior, but they can't, or voters, but they can't track what any individual will do. I mean, there's an unpredictability there. I've forgotten, there's a name for it in the most current economic theory. But that idea of how do the people behave, how does the nation behave, how does the world behave versus how do individuals behave, and that there are parallels in that.
Right. Well, that's what I was trying to say with Aristotle.
Yeah, no, I think that's very apt.
Yeah, Aristotle takes the idea that, family is the base unit of society. So you have to kind of understand how the family works, and then you can kind of, by induction almost, figure out how a society should work or function.
Well, and the individual has a body and a head and the arms and the feet, and that's picked up by Shakespeare too. And I guess it's Aristotle or Plato.
Yeah, and of course, the idea of a Leviathan is the, this monster that represents the state, also.
And the country has, the nation has a head, and it has its arms, and it has its legs, and it has its heart, and it has all these different things.
Yeah, no, for sure. Interesting. Anyone else?
It's very interesting how much he's in a tradition and how much he passes on the tradition. Ibsen in his early plays writes a lot about magicians and alchemy, and his big epic plays, Emperor and Galilean, which is kind of
right.
Yeah.
Okay. Ella, go ahead, and then Madeline.
Yes, I just had an aside here about what Doug had just mentioned. Yeah, Doug, if you know the source of that citation about how human behavior is not just related to, meeting our instinctual needs, that would be great to get. Or if you have a name, I can look it up, of course. But I was thinking of, and I can't recall his name, but there was a French philosopher of sorts. I think he was French. He was originally Dutch. But anyway, he wrote this whole treatise on the fact that people are basically, like bees in a beehive. Are you familiar with that? Anyone? And anyway, that we basically should just let everyone do what they want. Let the bass be bass. Let there be alcohol, whatever. Just let people do what they're going to do, because at the end of the day, we just have to think about ourselves, and those that are apt and skilled are going to make it. It's better for even the weakest among the hive that the strongest are benefited, blah, 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 and so forth. And I'm going to think of his name and I'll throw it in the chat. But
French.
for your pleasurable reading.
Thank you, Madeline, go ahead.
Yeah, I wonder if Ella is thinking of Leibniz, because I know that Voltaire's Candide was a kind of a savage indictment of that type of thinking. Let everyone do what they want to, and everything will work itself out, and the suffering of some will even out in the larger scale because everyone will be benefited. I had been wondering during the discussion of alchemy and literature and how it gets used, I'm just wondering if we have any, I don't really think we do, if we have any societal equivalents today that resonate with people, or if they're all historical.
In terms of alchemy?
Yeah. In other words, are the same themes emerging in media or social media or contemporary literature?
The most obvious thing I would say is horoscopes, right? The idea that stars influence people, and that's a huge part of alchemy, because stars and again, the macrocosm has a secret link to our lives here, right? We're all really controlled by the stars, and our destiny is in some way controlled by these different stars that we're born under, and that's why we have to save ourselves, right? That's the idea of salvation in alchemy / Gnosticism, is that we are going to put ourselves outside the influence of these things that really tie us down and that kind of hinder us. So, I mean, that last part is probably not current anymore, but the kind of I guess the crude, the vulgar version of that is still out there in the horoscopes and astrology, and even palm readings and things like that. I want to quickly maybe go back to this carnival and mention a couple of things. So what is this? So I think we mentioned this earlier when we were talking about in the introduction of Faust, that Goethe took a journey to Italy. And that journey was very influential in his thinking and his ideas of beauty and philosophy, etc. And so when I was reading the commentary on the section, a lot of people suggested that everything he sees in this carnival in some way is a reflection of what he saw in Italy. The classical paintings, architecture, style, and even philosophy, he was all influenced by his journey, which, by the way, took almost 2 years. And he went all throughout Italy, and then he went to Sicily. And there's actually a published travelogue, if you're interested, which is, I started actually downloaded and started reading. It's very readable. If you guys want to read this, it's called the Italian Journey, or Journeys, the Italian Journeys by Goethe. So it's been translated into English. I think you can find it on Amazon. Very, very readable travelogue. And it's he just writes about what he sees and different impressions that different cities and experiences make on him. And one of the first things that he notes is the fruits that he sees in Italy and how they taste much better than the ones in Germany, because they are grown in a different climate. And of course, in the carnival, you have this procession of flower girls followed by flowers themselves, and then you have the gardeners and their fruit. And I mean, it's almost too perfect of a comparison. You have these sort of progressions from something that's purely aesthetic, right? Flowers and roses, especially, and then you go down to something that's halfway between aesthetics and utility, right? The gardeners and their fruit, and then you oscillate between that part of society, and then you have the woodcutters who are just crude and kind of uncouth, and a little bit savage even. They're coming in and they're like, we're rough guys, but without us, you can't really function. And then you have the opposite of that, the parasites and the pulcinelli. The pulcinelli, I guess, are like the Italian harlequins or masqueraded clowns. And they're talking about, oh yeah, you guys work so hard with your axes and so forth. All we have to do is dress up in fancy, silly clothes, and we enjoy life. We're kind of at the top of the societal pyramid. So it's a very curious procession and an experience, very different from Walpurgis Night, very different from everything we've seen before when Faust and Mephistopheles were just walking around in town right after the Easter service. It's a very different experience. And I guess it's interesting because the society there is obviously in decline. And I'm curious if any of these things, they kind of offer some insight into why it's in decline, how these parts of society are interacting and so on. I guess if you have any comments on any of that or anything else, go ahead and type exclamation point. If not, I'll just keep commenting on different things as we go along. One other section that I thought was super interesting is the section with Mephistopheles and Faust. This is towards the end, where they're discussing how Faust needs to summon Helen. How does he actually do it? And Mephistopheles says, well, you have to go to this place, which is place of nothingness. And I thought that was very,
Yeah.
I mean, that was like, whoa, like where this seems very modern to me, very anti-romantic, romantic in a sense, right? Place of nothingness. Here we are with nature and blossoms and everything being so visual and fresh, and now all of a sudden we're in the place of nothingness, this abstraction, right? The place of naught. And then the next thing, you have to go to this place of nothingness, and he has to interact with these mothers, Mutter in German, and then this word for some reason really scares Faust. Mothers. There's something very primitive, very base, kind of instinctive. Of course, a lot of commentators immediately seize on Freudian themes there, and all kinds of very interesting interpretation of kind of the subconscious, and you have to really access the subconscious to bring out, face your passions, face your hidden desires, etc. So again, super interesting passages there. We could even maybe read a few lines there if I can find them real quick. Let's see. And then see if that maybe can help us with. Right, okay, so I am reading from line 6210. This is part 2, Act 1, 6210. So when Faust brings up Helen, Mephistopheles says, I have no commerce with that pagan clutter. They have their segregated plot. There is a way, though. Faust, speak and do not fiddle. Mephistopheles, I loathe to touch a more exalted riddle. Goddesses sit enthroned in reverend loneliness. Space is as naught about them. Time is less. The very mention of them is distress. They are the mothers. Faust, startled. Mothers. Mephistopheles, are you awed? The mothers, why? It strikes a singular chord. Mephistopheles, and so it ought. Goddesses undivined by mortals, named with shrinking by our kind. Go delve the downmost for their habitat. Blame by yourself that it has come to that. Faust, where's the road? Mephistopheles, no road. Into the unexceeded, the inaccessible, toward the never pleaded, the never pleadable. How is your mood? There are no locks to probe, no bolts to shift. By desolation harrowed you will drift. Can you conceive of wastes of solitude? So and so on. So this is, again, just a super interesting passage in these themes of nothingness, inaccessible spaces. What are we talking about? Are we talking about subconscious? Are we talking about, it's obviously not just some physical place, right, as before. It's not like we're going to the Brocken mountaintop in Harz Mountain region. This is something beyond that. So it's some kind of almost a psychological quest. So anyway, just curious if you guys have any thoughts on that. Ella and then Doug. Ella, go ahead. You're muted.
Okay, sorry about that. In an alchemical sense, mater,
Mm-hmm.
womb, he is, you have to break down the ego, the false self, and one has to go alchemically into a first material, which is also talked about in philosophy. Who talked about everything being one primary material? What philosopher, I can't remember, but it's the matrix, the womb, the generative substance. All matter comes from the same root. And this is where he is. It's certainly like the collective unconscious. And the mothers are like goddesses, but they're also, goddesses are often archetypes. And so they have these innate patterns of behavior and so forth. And Carl Jung would say, of course, that, you know, the archetypes are available to all of us in our collective unconscious that we all share.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, he's really going, we're getting out of, you know, all the journeys in part one, a almost typical relationship with Gretchen, and we're going into, he's really deep into his journey now, because he's going into the prima matura, it's called.
Mm.
And in alchemy, you have to break down everything, all substances, in order to form a new substance. So just wanted to.
So we're in the
throw that out
dissolution
there.
stage, you're saying?
Yeah, dissolution, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Into the prima matura, the basic substance that makes up all matter in the universe.
Mm.
And then it can be rebuilt into gold, into a higher spiritual being.
Interesting. Thank you, Ella. I was curious if maybe that means that Helen, in the scheme of things, is really more kind of a Platonic ideal of beauty more than Gretchen. Gretchen was kind of more real, very realistic, very pragmatic, very kind of flesh and blood, and she didn't work for Faust, right? He does not stay with her. He does not die with her in the dungeon. She's too limiting for him. But Helen is a different ballgame. Helen is this kind of ideal of beauty, right? She's not tied to a real mother, a real brother, a real anything. She is just a myth in a sense, right? Very nebulous. And to get her, you have to go to this place of nothingness, place of dissolution, and get her from there. So in some ways, we're becoming much more intellectual, much more abstract. And I keep thinking again of, I keep going back to Maslow's pyramid of needs. We're much more into self-realization, way beyond just the physical, just the basic needs, right? We're really striving for something that's almost like the Platonic ideal of beauty, and the same, or beatific vision in Dante, etc. Doug and then Madeline.
Yeah, I wanted to talk just a little bit about the no thing and the thing and the no thing. And in Shakespeare, those are sexual symbols, the thing, the no thing. But also in the studies I've done, like in the Cloud of Unknowing, where you try to reach a state of nothingness or emptiness. And if you see an image of God, that's not God. You go deeper than that. You go below that. It's like the name in Jewish traditions, or the name that can't be named.
Mm-hmm.
But also in Islamic traditions, Allah actually means the nothingness. And so even the phrase, there is no God but God, literal translation would be, there is no thing but no thingness, which actually harmonizes with a lot of the Heart Sutra stuff that comes out of Buddhism. Form is emptiness, emptiness is form. It's pretty mysterious the way this stuff pervades different philosophies around the globe. That's it.
You know what? When you were talking about this, I was thinking of apophatic theology. In other words, describing God by saying what he is not, which is very prominent in Eastern, especially in Eastern.
Right. Yeah. No, I finally discovered that concept recently. Maybe you brought it up during the Dante discussion.
I might have. Yeah, I might have. Yeah.
Can you put that word in the chat?
Yep.
Because I don't always hear things.
Apophatic.
Apophatic. Great.
Yeah. Madeline and then Lena.
Well, this is the part where I got onto the idea that he was talking about Plato's theory of forms.
Mm-hmm.
The part where Mephistopheles says, then down, descend, or what's the same thing, rise, escape existing things, all that's alive, and seek to penetrate the cloudy realms of empty, spectral, unsubstantial forms. Delight in what has long ceased to exist, they'll wind around you, these wraiths, like the mist. Swing your key so as to keep them off. And then a little later he says, formation, transformation, the eternal mind in eternal self-conversation, surrounded by the forms of all things possible, they see schemata only, you are invisible. So the mothers only see the forms, they don't see manifestations of the forms, such as Faust. Nonetheless, his key has power over their crucible, which is on the tripod.
Mm-hmm.
So that key maybe is a liminal object between the spectral world of forms and the world of substance.
Interesting. Yeah, that's great. So by the way, we're reading, this is verses, I guess, 60 to 75, if you want to follow that, and down from there. So yeah, this is the end of the Dark Gallery section. Yeah, this reads very much, very Platonic or Neoplatonic, Madeline. So I think definitely there's definitely a connection there.
And I think I think glowing tripod, because he says in my version it's on 64, looks like 77, the line. A glowing tripod, when you see it, means you've reached the bottommost, deepest depth of things. By the light it casts, you'll see the mothers, sitting, standing some, or walking others. So down at the very depths of everything is this very, very ancient tripod. I mean, it sounds like this is down in the deepest depths of the psyche. Oh, what a cool comment, Doug. Doug put, the oracle at Delphi was a woman, Sybil, who sat on a tripod stool over a crack in the earth where mists emerged. Okay.
Yeah, I have it in my notes too that the tripod possibly references the oracle at Delphi.
I also had a question. I felt like I was watching a film and suddenly it skipped. When Mephistopheles says to Faust, remember you promised to, conjure up Helen in Paris. I was like, wait, when did that happen? When did he say that? That took place just sort of off stage?
Yeah, I guess so. There seems to be a lot of gaps like that. Like things are happening that we don't see them. We don't see how Faust ends up at the court. We don't see him at the, well, we can kind of guess that Faust and Mephistopheles are at the carnival. They're just masked as Faust as Plutus and Mephistopheles as this other character, Thersites. But it's not clear. Yeah, so I think there are some gaps that are just alluded to, and we don't really have, I don't think there was a mention of that earlier. So
okay, thanks.
Yeah. Elena and then Dimitri. Elena, go ahead.
Right. I've been wondering. So, okay, this particular part where Faust is suggesting to emperor to issue paper money, and at this particular point, to me, he's exploring wealth, power, one of the four desires, right? There is fame, knowledge, wealth, and power.
Mm-hmm.
So he's seeking answers in physical world, what it is, and how to feel this moment of happiness and be content for the entirety, right? And through, okay, issuing paper money, and is this the part where he really explores wealth and power? That's what it appears to me. And then also what is it, the nature versus actual prose, because of then issuing paper money leads to constant economic expansion, etc. And then my question is to everyone, so how does transition from there to the next scene?
You're breaking up a little bit, Elena, so I'm going to go ahead and try to answer or try to.
And
Yeah, you're still breaking up. So let me try to maybe mention a few thoughts on that. Actually, Doug, I'm going to steal your suggestion, which is that perhaps after the monetary expansion and the temporary boom that it creates, the economic boom that it creates, the attention is shifted to additional entertainment, if you will. And that is the kind of the connecting link to bringing Helen and Paris, because once you solve the immediate bankruptcy problems and insolvency problems, then of course what we need next is more entertainment, right, to fill the gap. The kingdom, the empire, is not actually producing anything, it seems, or not enough of it, because they're insolvent. So instead of focusing on that, they want to have more entertainment, right? So their idea is, okay, let's have Mephistopheles, who is, by the way, he is the wise man, but he's also the jester, right? He's the court jester. So the ironic part is that the jester, the joker, is the wise man in this kingdom, which is already a very funny and ironic position that he occupies, right? So the jester is solving the monetary problems by, printing all this paper money backed by essentially nothing. But the connection with that leads to, again, to this idea of entertainment and bringing back Helen and Paris. And Mitch, I'm going to give you the floor in just a second. I thought it was very, very entertaining how the ladies of the court reacted to Helen and how the men reacted to Helen, and also to Paris, which was just perfect, right? The ladies all try to denigrate Helen, like, she's okay, but not really that great. and the men do the same thing with Paris. They're like, this guy, he's all right. Nothing to write home about. So anyway, Goethe is just very observant of human nature and how we tend to belittle the other person who's like, because of disadvantageous comparison to ourselves, right? So anyway, Dimitri, go ahead.
Yes, I wanted to refer to something that was mentioned before, that originally it seems to me that Faust was striving for some ideal of beauty in his original quest, right? Before he met the devil, Mephistopheles, right? And now in his transformation, he's starting to kind of look for concrete embodiments of that ideal. First for Gretchen, and now he's meeting Helen, right? And again, he's not successful. Even in his abstract quest for the ideal of beauty, he was not successful. And now in his concrete quest, he is also not successful. And remember we mentioned last time and talked about how he was jealous when Gretchen during the Eucharist kissed the body of Lord. And in the same way, he was jealous of God. Now he's jealous of Paris. He's always jealous, and then he never gets even the concrete embodiment, let alone the abstract ideal of beauty. Even the words are the same. He's saying, far as she was, how can she be more near? He's using the same words that he used in the first part, when he's saying, I am near her, however far I be. She'll never be forgotten and ignored. Indeed, I am consumed with jealousy that her lips touch the body of the Lord.
Right.
The lines are the same. He's using the same lines. It's always he sees her, but he cannot touch her. He's near her, but he cannot do anything about it. And he always loses the woman to somebody who is more perfect than he is. In one case, God. In another case, Paris, who is an ideal of a man. In some case, he's more beautiful, at least in this way. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So that's basically what I was trying to get.
No, that's an interesting point about that Faust wants to be, again, it's this idea of no limitations, right? He wants to be as near to Gretchen as his own breath or her own heartbeat. He wants to be as near to Helen so that there's no one else. It's almost like this idea that, I don't know, if you've ever been in love and in your teens, you want to be with the other person at all times. You don't care, like whether it's night or day or anything else. It's just like you're obsessed. It's this obsession. And I think Faust is very much of a obsessive personality. But of course, again, it's not just him individually. He represents obsessive nature of humanity, right? We tend to be obsessive. Think of technology. We just can't say no. Right? That to me is just another, we've replaced in some ways technology. We obsess over technology the same way that we used to obsess about women or women over men. So we can never say, let's just step back. No more technology, no more technological advances for another 100 years. Okay, we're really good right now. Let's just step back and no more, right? Obviously, that never happens. No, not ever, right? We have to be as advanced as possible. So this never-ending quest is just so emblematic of I guess what I would call Faustian paradigm, right? The quest of no limitation, the quest of limitlessness, and it's it's constantly it's expressing itself in this obsession, in personal obsession, but it's obviously much bigger phenomena.
Yes, I agree. And the point I was trying to make from the abstract quest for some ideal, he was transformed to a concrete quest, but he still cannot reach it. Even in concrete ways, he cannot reach it, let alone in abstractions.
That's an interesting observation. I'm curious if anyone else has any comments on that as well. What do you guys think about Faust starting out as a kind of seeker for truth in an abstract sense, and now more he's out there in the world, right, in the physical realm, and trying to find experiences. It's interesting. Any
I think he tips that in the very beginning. He sort of says, I've reached the edge of reason. Reason isn't doing it. I need to go out into experience. And even something that in terms of the mystics over the last 1,000 so years is direct experience of God and spirits, and not this bookish knowledge that explains realities. So he does sort of say, I've reached the levels of books and reason and throwing them away. And yeah, trying to go into something that's more experiential.
right.
Physically and metaphysically, sort of. I don't know, I'm not quite saying what I mean, but
Well, I am curious. I mean, in some ways, so I guess with Helen, is it just a repeat of Gretchen, or is it
No,
something?
no, he's going higher and higher. You know, he's trying to reach.
Right. So in
Gretchen
some
was not
ways,
as beautiful as Helen, you know.
but again, is it just physical beauty, right? That's the difference here, or is it something else? Is
I
it
think,
a beautiful girl?
in my opinion, you know, these women, you know, they grow. It is his manifestation of his previous search for the ideal of beauty. Now he's looking for concrete embodiments, you know, and his search is kind of, he's getting closer, but he doesn't quite reach his goal.
Hmm.
He always loses that goal, that woman, to somebody who is more perfect than he is. He's looking for that perfection, but somebody is more perfect, and he snatches what he has from him, you know.
Well, in case of Gretchen, I guess he loses to God himself.
To God, right? Like we discussed
You
last
can't
time.
really
In this
beat that.
case, I'm sorry?
You can't really beat that, right?
No, you cannot beat that. But
Yeah.
in this case, he loses even to something less perfect, just to Paris, you know, who is not. I don't know. So that's just my understanding.
One way of looking at it, it's just a saying the same thing with a different perspective. If he is in the collective unconscious, same place, this place of darkness, whatever, and he has, as many people pointed out here, the ideal beauty, Helen, and the ideal lover, Paris. Now, Carl Jung always talks about the conjunctio, putting those together, you know, the male and the female parts, and that both women have male and female parts, and men have female and male. And the female, Carl Jung says, to be whole, again, back to that same objective, to get beyond ego, to become who we can be, as Dmitry was pointing out. It's a journey. He's getting there. You know, maybe he's trying to put these two together. And this is another conjunctio, you know, a putting together of the opposites. Think of the yin yang symbol, the Tao. So I think sprinkled throughout, he has, Goethe has incorporated unions of males and females. But I try to remember, this is, with all the characters, this is all about Faust and his differentiation and his ascension into, you know, his best self, who he can be, you know, beyond who he has been. So to a much higher level. So yeah, those are my thoughts on that.
Thank you, Ella. That was great. I'm curious. I want to make sure everybody gets a chance to share if you want to. I'm curious for some of the other folks in the group. what if you've read this far into part two? What has your experience been? Is it easier? Is it harder? Is it grabbing you as much as the first part, or are you having difficulty? Because I know traditionally people have struggled with this, and I'm just curious if there are any, if you've encountered any difficulties or any, just what is your experience reading this, and also how does it, in your mind, how does it work as far as the composition of the entire work? Does it work for you? Does it make sense that this is included and not something else? Were you expecting this, etc.? So anyway, if you have any of those thoughts, I would love to hear that. And yeah, we don't have a lot of people apparently clamoring for the spotlight today, which is unusual. A lot of times we have the opposite problem. But I'll just keep pointing out different things that that were interesting to me. So beyond the we talked about the carnival, it's interesting that Faust and Mephistopheles are not identified specifically in the carnival, but there's speculation that they hide behind Plutus's masks and Thersites' masks, respectively. Plutus, of course, is the god of wealth, and also sometimes associated with the god of the underworld, which is very interesting because of this idea of jealousy that Dmitry brought up. Wealth and jealousy typically go together. And it seems that Faust is in this predicament. He is always kind of stuck in this place of wanting to have more, but then once he gets it, it's like, just like you described, he's blinded by desire. So he doesn't actually understand that once he gets what he wants, he's not going to be satisfied. He's just going to be a next step. Just like the sun is in that first opening scene, the sun is ascending the steps as it's rising. So the fulfillment of one desire doesn't, all it does, it leads you just to the next step. And that's the human condition, I guess. That's the something that Freud described in his book, Civilization and Its Discontents, is that human experience is just a series of fulfillments that lead to further unfulfillment. And that's the predicament that we all face. So Plutus is maybe an appropriate mask for Faust. And then Thersites is this anti-classical guy, right? Thersites in Iliad is the guy who questions Odysseus and questions the Greek leadership and gets bludgeoned for it. And now Mephistopheles wears this mask of this just kind of spirit of annihilation, spirit of negation, spirit of I guess deconstruction, if you will. And it's probably very appropriate for him as well. I'm curious if any of you thought anything about that. So those are my thoughts. I don't really have much more in my notes. Oh, I do actually. So we have a series of these ladies in the procession, in the carnival, obviously also masked. We have the Fates, who are the Greek Fates, Clotho, Lachesis, and Atropos, who control the extent of human life and the course of human life. And then you have the Furies, who are typically associated with inciting strife or discord. And kind of there, it's interesting that they're there. Like, why are they there? What role do they play in the overall scheme of things? When I was reading this and contemplating this, I thought maybe, again, going back to this allegory of the state being a symbol of a single person, or a single person being an allegory of the state, maybe they symbolize these passions that sort of consume us and cause this continual striving, continual search for something else. And it's just this picture of a human heart or human soul, not just as a one thing, but as a sort of concert of these discordant voices that are each clamoring for attention and each clamoring for some sort of role. So I'm curious if any of you have any thoughts on that, or in general, maybe you have a completely different conception of what their role is in this scene. And then, of course, you also have this juxtaposition of intelligence with hope and fear. Typically, we associate hope with something positive, but hope and fear, they're both in chains. They both represent something, I guess, that is keeping humanity from achieving something. So hopes and fear are both represented as these women who are in chain, but the victory is when intelligence or reason rules over them. Again, this is just a carnival. It's not necessarily what Goethe believes. I don't think he does believe that, because this is much more of an Enlightenment idea, and he is kind of a reaction to that, right? The Romantic movement was a reaction to this idea of Enlightenment and reason as kind of the end all and answer to all. So anyway, again, very interesting juxtaposition in this carnival. It's like the carnival represents kind of the world and the world of ideas as well.
The only thing I'd add is that I think from the medieval theater in that there's certain kinds of stages, and sometimes stages on wagons that parade through towns, and then parades, and we still see that in cities today, very ancient, like mumming traditions and things. But it's interesting. I can't talk about this comprehensively, but I'm fascinated by the image of a stage and an action on a stage and the various levels on which Goethe explores that, you know, and so that a parade or a procession, which we saw in Dante at the end as they approach heaven, that the procession is a big thing and it's symbolic of forces gathering for some momentous moment. But I'm not sure whether Goethe is taking that seriously or parodying it or both, you know, I mean, that he's sort of, I had one comment about the women. Go ahead.
I was struck by how modern this part is, this self-reflexivity, right?
Yeah.
What was that movie, something about Schenectady in New York, where you have a theater? So so it's the same thing, right? We start out with, in the intro, you have the stage director talking to the poet and the jester. Already, that's kind of very self-reflexive. But then Goethe takes it a step further. We have in part one, we have this staging, right, of a classical Oberon and Titania, right? Harkening back to Shakespeare, who is, of course, the person who wrote the plays for the stage. So you have a work that is meant to be a play describing another play. So we have a play within a play, and now we have another procession within that play. So it's like you have these really interesting levels that Goethe explores of reflexivity, which are, again, just seems very modern to me, very unusual for that time period. I can't think of another work that was contemporary to him that really did a lot of this sort of introspection and self-reflexivity and kind of looking at what you're doing, right, in a sense, right? Because we are staging a play, and yet we are inside of another play. Yeah, go ahead, Doug.
Clearly a big influence on Goethe was Shakespeare's Tempest, where there is actually, in the middle of this strange play on this deserted island, the spirits come and perform kind of a court masque where they all show up and entertain people with this sort of, so that idea that you have a play and then you have a mask within the play, which in Midsummer Night's Dream is sort of a comic farce that goes terribly wrong, and that's why it's so funny, is that it goes wrong, this idea of and Prospero is certainly self-reflexive, and Harold Bloom often talks about that idea of somebody meditating on their own reality as something that we really get with Hamlet, Prospero, various, even Falstaff, who is a comic form of that, but is definitely aware of his compromised morals and his joy in life. I mean, that idea that Prospero definitely sort of by the end breaks his wand of power, hands his magic away, decides it's not really serving what he needs to do with his family and friends at that moment, that magic is not what he needs. So and I think Goethe is very influenced by that, but I can't track it. I can't see the one-to-one correlations. It's like, I almost think it would take me a year of studying Goethe to figure some of that out. But
Thank you, Doug. Yeah, those are really good references to Shakespeare. And yeah, I was thinking about that too.
I one thing, I saw a terrific production by an Italian director, Giorgio Strehler of The Tempest in LA. And when he broke the wand, and there are sets in this play too, you know, there's stages. Oh, there's a proscenium arc. He breaks the wand, the whole set fell apart. And then when he finished the speech, the whole set kind of went back together again. So it was a symbol of the scaffold of reality falling apart and then coming back together again. I mean, it was an incredible production.
Excellent. All right. I don't have a lot more to say. I'm kind of pretty much shared my insights from this. So unless there is another, any of you guys want to share something, I guess we'll end early tonight.
I have a little thing that might
Yeah,
spark
go ahead,
conversation.
Yeah.
This idea of the different age of women and how they react to Paris, and the oldest one reacts to his aroma, you know, that he has sort of this smell of youth, as the older woman might be most sensitive to that. When I was in a dementia care center with my mother, I noticed one day, and most of the women were asleep in their chairs, and one day somebody carried in an infant baby into the room, and all these women who'd been asleep suddenly woke up and turned to the baby like flowers to the sun. It was just like a remarkable moment where these women sort of smelled or sensed this baby that had entered the room. So I wonder, anyway, that's all. I'm just curious. It's so interesting what Goethe is doing with the range of women in this play. I'm just curious if Ella or Matt.
Yeah, we have some interesting, we absolutely have some interesting women characters in this. So we have Gretchen, of course, then we have Martha, who is a completely different person. Then we have Gretchen's mother, a very devout woman. And then you have these flower girls here in this procession, ladies at the court. There's just there was another interesting interchange with daughter and mother at the carnival. I don't know if you guys caught that, which was quite interesting. Basically, the mother is instructing her daughter not to lose her chance at the carnival, right? To snatch up her husband. Anyway, it was just, again, very interesting dynamics there. Quite satirical in some ways.
I think Madeline has her hand up.
Madeline, go ahead if you have something to say. Go ahead.
I think Ella has her hand up before me.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see you guys. I'm too engrossed in what Doug was saying.
I thought that was an old, okay, yeah, Ella.
Yeah, Ella, Madeline, and then Dimitri.
Oh, is it me? Do I have my hand up?
No, you put in an exclamation point, but
yeah, I did want to say something quickly. Just how much I enjoy this group, and all of the insight from so many different perspectives, and it's really enriching to me, and I appreciate it.
Thank you, Ella, and same goes for your comments as well. We really appreciate your angle on it, and Jung's sort of like Jung's perspective / alchemical perspective. So thank you. Madeline and Dimitri.
I just wanted to talk about the very end. A couple of pages before that, Faust is talking about Helen's beauty, and beauty's very fountain origin, outpouring from the depths of mind within. Now I'm a priest of beauty, How desirable, how firmly based, how solid and enduring. But then here we are right at the very end. Faust is seizing her. There's reference to a rape. And I'm wondering if here she is the anima figure for him. And then the astrologer comments, "Whatever are you doing, Faust, oh Faust? He seized her, madman, now she's fading fast. The key's aimed at the youth. Oh no, it touches him, it's any second now." Then Faust is knocked flat in an explosion, and all of those spirits, all of those glorious forms from the realm of the mothers, the schemata, they're gone. So I'm wondering, I guess my main question really was, as Faust is saying, mothers, mothers, let me have her. When once you've seen her, you can't live without her. The astrologer says the key's aimed at the youth. So the youth would be Faust. Who's aiming the key? Who's touching him with the key?
I think
the key. Yeah.
I think Faust is aiming the key at Paris because Paris is carrying her off and he wants to stop that. It's like a guy who's directed a play and he's cast it. And when the character walks off with the romantic woman, the playwright leaps on the stage and grabs the woman because he can't bear the character carrying off the woman. I think that's what he's doing there.
Oh, I see. I thought it was Faust seizing Helen. Okay, now it makes sense, a lot more sense. Thanks.
And it's like this mythic memory he's brought up from the mothers, and he violates it. He can't leave Helen with Paris. He has to have Helen, and so he explodes the whole. That was interesting. That brings up something I'd forgotten, which is the mothers have all these spirits of everything that's happened in the world hovering over them, and that encyclopedia of spirits is what that Faust draws up Paris and Helena out of this vapor of memories that hover over the mothers. It's like the record of history is floating over the mothers, and Faust pulls them out.
Yeah.
And Mephistopheles, when he sends him down there, says, "I don't know if he's going to come back or not. This is really dangerous," to sort of take something away from the mothers,
Yeah, and that seemed very typical of Mephistopheles too. That he would send Faust into danger. So first there was one part where he says, "Oh, Faust, I can't go myself. You have to go," which was very reminiscent of the scene with the turnkey, where Mephistopheles persuades Faust to go visit Gretchen in prison, but he has to get the key. And then Mephistopheles, after he, sends Faust down there, says, "Well, I don't know if it'll work or not." And it's just, it's just the way he is. He's just a big bullshitter.
Well, I think that's what he says in the beginning. It's a cat and mouse game. I'm not interested in taking on the souls of dead people. I want to see something live, struggling on the line.
Right.
And, can I pull him in, or do I have to let him out a little bit to keep the game going?
There's also a remark that Faust makes about this whole endeavor with the key, where he says, "I know that you're using me to get something for yourself. In other words, you're sending me into this furnace, but you really want the embers for yourself, the embers that I'm going to get, and putting myself at risk." So that's part of I think the Dark Gallery conversation. So I totally agree, Madeline, that that Mephistopheles, he is definitely that type of character. That's opportunist. Dmitry and then Ella.
Yes, I just wanted to maybe compare Goethe to Heraclitus. Like, do you remember the ancient philosopher Heraclitus? He said that strife is at the heart of things.
Right. Yep.
That was his idea. If there was no strife, everything would perish. And if you look at the last lines here, right, where he says he seizes her. Okay, that's when he seizes her. That's when the striving ceases. When he reaches his goal, everything is gone. All vanished, gone. Everything perishes. So as soon as strife is over, everything is gone. And that's exactly what Heraclitus is saying. If there was no strife, everything would perish. The whole world would perish. And in the last lines, that's what you see. As soon as he seizes her, as soon as striving stops, everything perishes. Everything is gone.
Right. And in this context, of course, as soon as striving stops, he loses his bet.
He loses.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, yeah, absolutely. Ella, did you want to add to that?
Yes, I see it in a sense as he completely thought he was in control of Mephistopheles. If you recall the wager in the beginning, he went along with it. He thought, it'll never end that way. I'm going to enjoy myself, and I'm just going to ride this out, this bet, because I'm going to enjoy myself. And my damnation, my deal with you, it's not going to ever come to pass. That's the feeling I got from it. But I think what he has to do now is he has to take this key, and I cannot figure out to this point what the key stands for. And it's, if any of you have any ideas, but he has to take this key. It has something to do with Paris's youth and vitality and Helen's absolute beauty. And he has to do something to rise out of this situation. He can't just grab Helen, because she goes up in a puff of smoke or something. So basically, he can't do it as a physical, flailing philosopher of intellect. And he has to use that key to find his way to a higher consciousness.
Yeah, I was hoping you guys could, or you, Ellen, could tell us what the key was, but because I'm not sure I understand it either. What the actual, what the significance is of that particular symbol, I guess. So yeah,
I'm wondering if there's some Masonic symbols or like keys to the kingdom, keys to the pearly gates, keys to the keys. He seems, even in the first scene in the study, he does a key that he touches a book with a key, or the key sort of unlocks things, and
yeah,
either
I
an
remember
actual door or a metaphysical door.
Yeah, he was drawing the symbol of the macrocosm, which is why I brought up that whole thing with microcosm versus macrocosm. So there was the sign of that that he was actually looking at and said, "Oh, that looks good." But I don't know if there was was there a key also that he used, or?
I thought I saw it when I was watching the movie of Faust.
Right.
I haven't found part 2 with subtitles. Is there one where part 2? I found part 2, but it didn't have subtitles. Has anyone found Peter Stein's movie with subtitles for part 2?
I don't know. I thought that video was the whole thing, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's just part 1, right?
Well, the whole thing is on a video, and I think there are some videos that have both of them. Some have part 1, some have part 2, and I'm just having a hard time finding one with subtitles for part 2.
Okay. Madeline, go ahead.
Well, I'm sure that the key had some sort of Masonic or alchemical significance that we don't know yet. It seems to be the only thing that can affect a change between realms, affect with an E. It's used, the witches, they can't even see Faust. And presumably anything he did to the tripod himself would also be similarly unsubstantial because of the realm. But touching it with the key is what does it. And the same thing at the end. is touching Paris and Helen with the key, sends them back.
Mhm.
So it's it's almost like a doorway in and of itself, not just a key, or a key that unlocks a doorway between the realms of forms and substance, or the realms of magic and matter. So the key could possibly just be a what do you call it? Metonymy, maybe, for a door.
Right, okay. No, that's interesting. Yeah. I guess as we read too, we'll probably will get further, maybe further ideas with the other characters that are coming. Maybe that will help us. Okay, well, this was great, guys. Thank you so much for participating and various insights. As Ella had mentioned earlier, this is I really also really enjoy getting together like this and having a chance to share and hear your thoughts and your interpretation of the play. It's very rich, very multifaceted, and I absolutely enjoy discussing it with you. So for next time, we're just going to keep going. We will read Act 2 for next time, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Thanks, Phil. Thanks, Doug.
Yeah, thank you.